Hello and welcome to Lesson 4A. This will be a supplemental lesson on the working memory model and the research supporting and criticizing it. So let's get stuck in. We're going to look at research specifically. So remember from last time, we talked about the central executive, the supervisory component. It had three slave systems to help it do its job. In this case, we have the phonological loop, the visual spatial sketchpad, and the episodic buffer. The phonological loop processes speech and auditory information. The visual spatial sketchpad deals with visual imagery and spatial information. And the episodic buffer integrates information from coming into the short-term memory or the working memory, and it puts it into a sort of linear sequence, which allows us to, for example, remember things in order. It's very useful for helping us remember and learn stories, because stories have a natural chronological order, and the episodic buffer is what allows us to do that. It can also access long-term memory as well. So if you remember, there were a number of studies like Rutschkin that criticised the multi-store model. Generally, studies that criticise the multi-store model can be used to support the working memory model, but be a bit savvy. And one of the best ones is KF. So the actual researchers were called Shallis and Warrington, and they studied KF who had short-term memory loss, damage. He had a digit span of 2, so you can only remember 2 items, a recency effect of 1, which we talked about in class, but he could process visual information relatively unimpaired. Now that suggests that short-term memory has 2 components. One for the acoustic information, which was damaged, but one for visual processing, which was relatively intact. If the short-term memory system is unitary, damage to part of it should affect their ability to remember any information in short-term memory, irrespective of the modality. Okay, so that's a really strong evaluation point, but let's compound it. Compound evaluation has 2 components to it. The first might be a pro, so the second is going to criticize the evidence we've just provided. So in this case, we're going to say, however, one of the limitations of KF and this kind of support is that it's a case study. And what's interesting about case studies is they are totally unique, especially brain damage studies. No 2 individuals have the same brain damage, even if they undergo exactly the same process, because of the way the brain develops, and it develops slightly individually in everyone. Even the same damage wouldn't necessarily have the same effect. So we could question whether or not the damage in KF's case directly affected short-term memory, or whether it affected another cognitive system, like his attention system. Picture this. You have a student in class who just can't remember anything you tell them. Is it because their memory's bad, or is it because their attention system is broken? So someone with ADHD, you wouldn't say, oh, you've got bad memory because you don't remember anything I tell you. You say you have an attention deficit. Whereas, so it's difficult to unentangle these things, especially with people with brain damage or psychological disorders, mental disorders, or impairments. HITCH and BADDELEY in 1976 carried out a task which involved the phonological loop and the central executive. The central executive is also responsible for things like mental arithmetic and logical reasoning tasks. So they gave participants a logical reasoning task and an acoustic task simultaneously, or just one of the tasks on their own. What they found was that when you were performing both tasks simultaneously, performance actually went down. Now that's a problem, because it suggests that if performance remained the same, then all the process would be taking place in the same store. But instead, part of the process was taking place in the central executive and the other part in the phonological loop. This is an example of the task they were asked to do. Logical reasoning, does A follow B? You decide whether it's true or false. So there's some phonological processing, but some logical processing as well. Then, evaluation of central executive. This is a slightly weaker point, but the central executive is the most important and flexible component. BADDELEY agrees, so that it's very difficult to investigate. It's difficult to isolate it and test it individually. Further research, neuroscientific research has indicated that when we give a visual spatial task or a phonological task, different areas of the brain are actually activated. Now that's really important because we know that the visual cortex is responsible for vision, and in short-term memory, visual cortex is then responsible for visual processing, i.e. the visual spatial sketchpad, but only for simple tasks. The temporal lobe tends to be activated for phonological tasks, and the prefrontal cortex, just at the front, is activated generally for central executive tasks, so mental arithmetic, selective attention, and so forth. Now, because these different tasks activate different areas, we could say physically they are located in different places. Therefore, if there is a store that corresponds to them, there's a physical location to it, i.e. they are separate geographically in the brain. Slightly more general strength of the model is that it's been hugely influential. It's inspired a great deal of research, and psychologists now use the term working memory rather than short-term memory. And this makes STM a more plausible explanation of human memory. Finally, Logi looked at the visual spatial sketchpad, and he added some function into the visual cache. He said it was responsible for storing information about form and colour, whereas the inner scribe is responsible, as we know, for repetition, visual repetition, or rehearsal, but also with spatial and movement. Originally, they were thought to be located elsewhere. Finally, this is an example we're going to talk about in class, so remind me to mention driving whilst texting and why it's so dangerous. That has been your extended lecture on this, your supplemental lecture. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and I will see you in class.